Turning the clock back to the early 2000s, we're getting all kinds of musical up in here today. Get ready to review one of the all-time classics. Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new full review. The first time in way freaking too long. But today, turning the clock back a little bit to a pretty epic era in music, in my opinion. Back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, it was basically referred to as the mainstream explosion. If you reference that article about the 5 great eras in pop punk that Alternative Press did, that's how they label it, and I think it's appropriate. You had a lot of bands like Blink-182 and Sum 41 that blew up and got huge, not only selling millions of albums, but also making their way on TRL countdowns on MTV as the most voted on videos for a day. But amid all that success of Sun bands, there was still a huge scene of underground bands that were actually getting their shot due to new ways of actually getting music out there, main reason being the internet, obviously. So while the scene was changing a whole lot, there were a lot of smaller bands that blended elements of those bigger bands with their own kind of twists or of smaller genres that never quite blew up in the way that pop punk did. And when it comes to the genre of emo rock, the spring of 2002 gave us a gem that is, in my opinion, still the best album to ever do that genre. If you know your history, you know that I am talking about none other than Taking Back Sunday's Tell All Your Friends. Now I know it may seem cliche to do a review on an album that's so widely loved and basically cherished, 12 years later? But man, there's so much that can be said about this, and the fact that it's held up so well over time, I think it makes it worthy of a review for something like this. Not to mention it's had a huge impact on a lot of people over a lot of years. And if that impact is still being felt 12 years after the album was released, well, I think it deserves every bit of praise it can get. When it comes to writing, one trend that was, and in some ways still is rampant, is bands cranking out lyrics and one-liners that could be printed on a t-shirt that anyone would buy. With Tell All Your Friends, almost any line from the album could be slapped on a t-shirt and people would buy it up back in those days, myself included. The lyrics are outright amazing. Different songs have different feels to them, ranging from your standard rhyming musical lyrics to other songs that almost feel conversational in the way that they're sung, like they're just casually telling a story through song. It all works though, and you can see the variance in just the first 2 songs on the album. I think a huge part of what makes these lyrics so good is that they're clever, and they say things that could be broad in how listeners might relate to them, while also enjoying that they said what you might be feeling in a much more creative way than you could have said it. And as good and as deep or creative as the writing is, it's rarely, if ever, too obscure or inside to where nobody could decipher their meaning. Really though, it's the relatability that I think really makes this album pop with people. After all, what's emo rock if you can't relate to the music and take some emotion from it? Emo equals emotion. Yeah, you get it. Tell All Your Friends tackles the obvious things in life like heartbreak and falling in love that you could expect from an emo rock album, and they do it well. But when you can work in things like not doing drugs or fights with your friends, it gives a nice diversity to things that makes everything feel that much more real. And considering that this was their debut album, well before they had anything in the realm of rock star status, it becomes that much easier to picture them as normal dudes trying to get by in life as best they can, like most anyone else. Going along with how the lyrics feel real and down to earth, clever as they may be, Tell All Your Friends has somewhat of the same feel when it comes to the production quality and vocal styles of the music. Back in 2002 was the height of the dominance by Drive-Thru Records, and I've always felt like they did an incredible job with their bands in giving a very crisp, well-produced sound on their albums. Victory Records didn't do that with Tell All Your Friends. Not to say it's underproduced or anything, but rather it just feels rugged and real. I know, I'm driving the point home about it feeling so real, but I really believe that's a big part of what makes this album so near and dear to so many people. None of it feels like this album had executives wearing suits pulling the strings of it all. Just dudes with instruments on an indie label that gave them a chance to be heard, which makes it much more easy to identify with. Production quality aside, this album ranges all over the place from fast-paced rock to slow and somber, knocking it completely out of the park with both of them. The way they blend lead guitar and rhythm guitar riffs together is already awesome enough, and the way the drums bring it all together is just brilliant. Throw in some great work on the bass guitar, some occasional piano, and the dueling vocals of Adam Lazzara and John Nolan to tie it all together, and you've got an album that's as good musically as it is lyrically. Having dabbled in playing in a band or two back in high school and seeing how tough it can be to get on the same page with certain things, it's astounding to think of the musical chemistry this band had to have to piece everything together like they did. People enjoy music for a bunch of different reasons, whether they want something soft and soothing like classical music, or if they want to rage their faces off with something like Andrew WK, the feeling conveyed by music is hugely important. If I were to sum up in one sentence what feelings are conveyed by Tell All Your Friends, I'd say it's an album that touches on all kinds of realities about growing up and dealing with what the world around you and the people in it will throw at you. That's at least how it's always felt for me. But then again, this album came out while I was in high school, somewhat in the peak of those years where you start to really expand and deal with what the world will throw at you for the first time. I've always wondered if it came out differently for people who were a different age or a different point of life than I was with it. I'm sure most fans have their own story as to why they relate to it. That's just mine. I know that might sound a little bit emo and whatnot, and if you're impervious to struggles or emotions, good on you. Most of us aren't, so we get through it whatever ways we can. Plus, this is a review of an emo rock album. Of course I've got to factor in how it connects on an emotional level. Overall, I think the feelings on the album have a good range. Some of the lyrics are obvious in their meaning and broad enough reaching to be great. Others, while still clever, are a bit more cryptic, but leave you to do with it what you will, and I like that. For me, what's a music review if you can't factor in how it would feel live? With this album, I don't have to wonder what it would feel like played live. I was lucky enough to see Taking Back Sunday with their original lineup 3 times, between the time when Tell All Your Friends came out and when the original lineup split up. The first time I saw them, I wasn't yet on board with their music. I had heard their name, but never given them a listen. But the energy they had on stage during those early years was freaking insane. Insane enough to grab my attention in a huge way. It was when they were on the road with Brand New as one of the other openers on a headlining tour for the band Rufio. That show was amazing. The way Taking Back Sunday gave it all in their shows back then and interacted with the crowd just felt so damn awesome. As a teenager going to those shows with all kinds of built-up angst, they were a pretty epic time. While I liked a handful of things the replacements to the original band lineup brought to the table, they just never had near the energy of those early years. Still floating around YouTube are videos of an entire set of Taking Back Sunday from that tour where I first saw them, and you can see every bit of the enthusiasm and energy in both the band and the crowd, even if the video is really low quality. The main point is, with so much emotion in their music, coupled with the energy they had on stage back then, those shows were guaranteed to be wild ones in a lot of ways. And nowadays, it's still enjoyable to see them live based on, if nothing else, the nostalgia of hearing those songs live, but they're still a pretty solid band, too. It's gotta be obvious by now that I think this album is one of the all-time classics. I was 16 years old when it came out, at the peak of all my teenage angst, learning all the hard lessons you have to learn at that age, and this album was one of my go-to discs. Yeah, we still used CDs back then. It starts as good as any album out there, with each song sounding fairly unique along the way. If I were to nitpick anything, it would be that the songs The Blue Channel and Head Club have never done a ton for me. They're good songs, but not great in my book. But even if I were grading every song individually and those ones were only a 5 or a 6 out of 10, there are 3 or 4 songs that I'd rate as something like a 14 or a 15 out of 10, so it more than balances out. Even still today, this album holds up 100%. I honestly feel like it hasn't lost one bit of its luster over time, which is incredible, because even with some of my other favorite albums ever, I can't say the same thing. Pretty sure that's what they mean when they describe something as timeless, and if an album can hold up this strong for 12 years, that's a pretty alright start to earning that label. I've always wondered what could have been if the original lineup had been able to write and record their follow-up to this album, rather than the rebuilt lineup they had. I always felt like a lot of the charm, complexity, and sincerity that made Tell All Your Friends great wasn't really there for the next album. As if some of the emotion was being forced into the lyrics a bit, rather than having the authentic feel I felt from Tell All Your Friends. All in all, Tell All Your Friends is an incredible album, both lyrically and instrumentally, all wrapped up with an incredible amount of emotion to tie it all together and relate to life in general. Simply put, in my book, and I think in plenty of other people's books, Taking Back Sunday's Tell All Your Friends is the most iconic album of the entire emo rock genre. Because of this, Tell All Your Friends, should surprise no one, gets a 10 out of 10. That is it for this week. If you like this review, or if you like this album, obviously, hit the like button below, give it a thumbs up. If you have comments, or you want to share your own thoughts about what this album has meant to you, or if you have thoughts about what you didn't necessarily like about it, share them in the comments below. Always click the subscribe button. I appreciate that. You'll appreciate that in the long run. You'll thank yourself later. As always, thank you so much for watching.